5:05, so we will be letting in more participants throughout the meeting. But for now, we're just going to get started with our introduction. So for you, those of you who don't know, we are Advocate for Lives, a youth-led organization that focuses on bringing awareness for both blood and organ donation, as well as health-related research. And before we begin, we're just going to go over a few housekeeping rules. So you guys probably know this, but please don't spam the chat and keep any swearing or inappropriate language away from the chat, as well as making sure that any messages in the chat are relevant to the seminar. And we'd appreciate it if you keep your mics off so that we can hear the speaker without being interrupted. And you guys already got the notification for it, but this session will be recorded, and we just do that to put that in our YouTube channel so that if you ever want to, you can watch it later on. And for anyone who would like volunteer hours for the seminar, we just appreciate it if you could rename yourself on Zoom just so we can have those names ready for the certificates. And we'll explain more about that whole process at the end.
Yep, so now that we've got that out of the way, today we're going to be talking to Olivia, who's a college senior who will be graduating with a BS in neuroscience this May. And she's also an accepted medical student and a junior human subject research coordinator and program director.
Yep, and we'll be addressing all the questions that you asked through the Google Forms and any that come in the chat at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Olivia, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm really excited. A couple of my own housekeeping things, and they're not really housekeeping. It's just me letting you know. I'm in a small office right now. My dog is with me. If he tends to pick up a toy or bark, just act like you didn't hear it. And then there's also construction going on in the basement of my house. So you might hear some banging, but everyone's okay, I assure you. We can get started here. So can you all see that okay?
Yep, it's good to go.
Beautiful. So yeah, I'm just going to be talking to you guys today a little bit about the PreMed experience as a whole, about how I found my way to this path to medicine and how I've been navigating my way through it up to this point. And as much as it seems like the hard part is over, this past 4 years and beyond of trying to get into medical school, now that I'm in it, it's exciting for a minute. I'm going to cherish it this summer, but it's about to pick right back up again as I start my medical school education and go into residency and more training and things like that. So this is the fun part right now, this sort of relaxation phase. And so I'm excited to be able to share with you the path that I've been on so far and maybe some things I'm excited about doing in the future. That's my Instagram handle there if you're interested, but I'll also have my contact information at the end. Here. There we go. So a little outline of what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a brief introduction about me, just a bit more for you to get a better idea of who I am. Then I'll talk a little bit about college life, specifically the curricular elements of the things I've been doing for the past 4 years. Then I'll talk a little bit about the current research that I'm doing. You heard earlier that I'm a junior human subjects research coordinator and a program manager at the Center for Health and Technology, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But that role gives me access to a variety of different research projects and populations that I've been able to work with for the past 4 years, which is very cool. And then lastly, I'll give you a brief overview about a general process of applying to medical school and then my slightly more unique path to it, since I had to deal with COVID and multiple MCAT exam reschedulings and things like that. So it was a little unique in my case. And then at the very end, I can open it up for questions. So a little bit more about me. That's a picture I recently took when it was just a little bit warmer outside here in Rochester, New York. But that's my hometown. It's also where I happen to go to college. If anyone from my area or who knows me is watching this, you'll probably complain that I'm not actually from Rochester. I'm from a small town on the outskirts of it. But for anyone not from New York State, Rochester is just easier. That's where I'm from and where I've spent the past 4 years in college. I'm excited to be headed off to Howard University for medical school, and that's located in Washington, D.C. I'll be there for the next 4 years. And then outside of all the things that I've been doing to prepare for medical school and get through college, what I do to relax and pass the time. I play a lot of soccer. I play at least once a week, and I'll have to figure out how I can do that in DC now. And I also love spending time with my dog that I mentioned earlier, and I'm trying to get back into reading this summer while I still have the time. So I just finished a whole book while I was on vacation, which was very big for me. I haven't finished a whole book in a minute, and hopefully I can finish a bunch more this summer. So first, I want to give you a little bit of an intro to my school. I've been at the University of Rochester for the past 4 years, and it is a private university here in Rochester, New York, but it's a pretty small one. So I had a good number of students in my class, and I didn't know everybody who was in my year, but I was able to develop friendships with a lot of them. And even if I didn't have a friendship, I recognized them always walking on campus. So these pictures at the top there, those are the main quad on our campus. It's really gorgeous. And that's one of the academic centers on our campus. Those are going to be more of your humanities and social science courses. And then we have a separate quad dedicated for more science heavy things. And we call it the science quad. So here on the bottom left is a bigger picture of the campus. You can see that middle area here, and in the back center is our library. And that's where we have the periodical reading room and a variety of different study spaces. And then the classrooms lining the outsides, directly adjacent or directly in front of that library, all the way in the bottom is the chapel, where a bunch of different activities take place. And then on the outskirts, you'll see some of the housing areas and the science and other extracurricular quads. On the bottom left, I really love this picture. I used to be a tour guide on our campus, and people would always ask, like, what's the parking like? Oh God, is it so bad? We don't see any parking spaces on campus. And I would always explain to them that it's because the University of Rochester campus is wedged between a river and a cemetery, two immovable things. So we can't really expand outward to make room for parking. You have to go to the outskirts of campus to find parking. And that means any parking spot you get on campus is going to cost you a little bit. But we would rather use those spaces for buildings and more resources for students than a parking space. But that's the campus. One of the unique things about Rochester is the way that the curriculum is organized. And it's actually one of the main reasons why I picked the University of Rochester. So it's one of only a few schools across the country that work with such a flexible system, and it's called the cluster system. So at other schools, you might have to come in and you're required to take a certain number of classes in a certain number of fields, regardless of what you want to study. For example, I have friends who have gone to other schools where no matter what they're interested in or what their major is, they have to take a language, they have to take a history course, they have to take a writing course and things like that. At Rochester, there are no required classes. And that sounds a little wild at first, but at front, when you first arrive and you haven't picked a major yet, you aren't required to take any specific class, except for one, and that's a writing course. But it's a pretty basic writing course just to make sure that you're able to keep up with the rigor of the writing that you'll be required to do throughout your next 4 years. Aside from that, all of the classes at the University of Rochester are divided into 3 categories: the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. And rather than requiring specific courses, the University of Rochester requires you to do something in each one of these spheres. And that something can either be a major, a minor, or a cluster. And a cluster is just a series of 3 courses that are loosely related all under one of those spheres. So for example, myself, I majored in neuroscience, which is a natural science, explaining the brain right there. I minored in American Sign Language, which was under the humanities, which is why I put the hands there. And then I did a cluster in psychology, that's just the icon that came up when I looked up psychology on Canva. But the cluster that I did in psychology, I'm actually finishing it up right now. I took 3 loosely related psychology courses and I satisfied that requirement. And then now that I've picked a major and a minor, I have to go to those major and minor websites to figure out what courses are required for me to get a degree in that major. So there are no required classes, but once you pick a major, there are certain things you need to do in order to graduate on time and graduate with the degree that you want. But there's so much autonomy in finding the things that you're interested in. And the way that this is designed is to better help students leave college as more well-rounded individuals. You don't want to have 2 extremes where you're either required to take too many courses that you're not interested in, or you have complete freedom and you miss out on certain aspects of your learning and education that are important for you to go out into the world. So Rochester found this unique balance where you can still choose the things you want to do, still decide where you want to spend the most of your time, but you've at least had some sort of baseline understanding of something in the natural sciences, social sciences, and the humanities, which I've really enjoyed. Because of this system, I discovered American Sign Language, which was an incredible experience and one that I hope to carry with me into medical school. I want to serve the deaf community as a physician, and I never would have discovered it had I gone anyplace else or learned under any other system. So I've given you an idea of the cluster system, and for me, I picked neuroscience as my major. And there's no pre-med major at the University of Rochester, but there's an office there to help you, regardless of what major, minor, or cluster you choose. They'll let you know what other coursework you need to complete in order to apply to a pre-health school. So this sheet is something that they'll give you during orientation, and it's for students who are interested in applying to medical school, dental school, or other vet programs. And it's just a step further in terms of instruction onto what courses you need to take. So this is probably not foreign to most of you if you've heard from any other people talking about the path to becoming a physician. But in order to take the MCAT and in order to apply to medical school, there are certain classes you need to take or are suggested to take, at least for the MCAT. And those include the ones listed here, like biology, biochemistry, math and statistics, physics, and English and writing. So for me, it was really convenient because my major, neuroscience, had a huge overlap with a lot of the classes that are required to be a pre-med or to apply to medical school. So I didn't have to think too hard about this list. But again, when you're applying to medical school, there are no major requirements in terms of you have to major in biology or biochemistry. You can really major in anything as long as you satisfy these course requirements as well. So for friends of mine at the U of R who maybe majored in history or political science, they still had to satisfy their major requirements for the school, but they also had to make sure that they were checking off each of their biology 1 and 2, Orgo 1 and 2, make sure they got their physics requirements taken care of. So they had to keep track of sort of 2 sets of requirements at once. Whereas for me, a neuroscience major, I almost didn't have to think about it. I thought about it once at the very beginning of my major, and then it was laid out really nicely for me, and I didn't have to think too hard after that. I had to think hard in class, but in terms of scheduling, I didn't have to. So a little bit more in depth about some of these. These are your pretty traditional pre-med or pre-health or health science coursework. Biology 1 and 2, I really enjoyed. Biochemistry was a bit of a struggle. I took that one in the midst of the pandemic, so things shut down right in the middle, and then our exams became open book, which we were really excited about, but they became twice as hard because they were open book. So I thought I was going to do better than I actually did. Chemistry, general chemistry wasn't really my thing, but I loved organic chemistry. I was one of those. And then you get still a lot of flexibility when you're thinking about taking all of these pre-med requirements. So for math and statistics at the U of R, you have 2 different math pathways you could take. There is all of the math material cut into 2 courses, or you can split it into 3 courses. So it's spread out a little bit more, a little less rigorous and easier to digest. For me, I am not a math gal, so I definitely took the 3-course route, and I ended up not even having to take the 3rd course in order to apply and get into medical school, which worked great to my advantage. For physics, we still had to take that one partly online, and that was an interesting experience to say the least. And then English and writing is required to apply to medical school, but it's also required for a university. So that's one given that every student got to work through. In addition to all of those required ones to apply to medical school, the University of Rochester provides a short list of other courses that might help you when you're studying for the MCAT or the GRE or whatever exam you need to take for grad school. So that's what those courses at the bottom are, just a list of them. And coincidentally, a couple of these I took for my psychology cluster, which really did help me when it came time to take the MCAT. So going a little bit deeper, now that you know my major, you know what I was required to take in order to apply to medical school, I wanted to give you a sneak peek into what a day in my life or a week in my life would look like. This is an actual screenshot from my camera from my Google Calendar back in 2019. So this is pre-pandemic when everything was in full swing. And it gives you a nice glimpse into my coursework at the time, the extracurriculars I picked up both for myself that I just enjoyed since before deciding to pursue medicine, and ones that I picked up and started to enjoy that will supplement my medical school application. So we can talk about a couple of these. And then the next slide actually shows you a different week, just to show you the variability in what you might face as you pursue medicine. So in this given week, this one was actually particularly exciting because I got to travel out of town for a conference on behalf of the Center for Health and Technology. And so on the far left here, this is on Sunday, I was in a pre-doc program that I applied for and was selected to join. And so we had meetings every month to listen to a speaker who's enrolled in medicine and then work alongside our peers in the program to do a problem-based learning session, which is basically a case where we export it and put on our doctor hats and sort of imagined navigating through it as medical students. That one did happen to coincide with a Habitat for Humanity meeting that I had, but that was okay, we made it work. And then afterward, I had chapter for Alpha Phi Omega, which is a co-ed or all gender community service organization that I joined my sophomore year. And so we have chapter every week, talk about the service projects that we're doing for that week, and cover any other important items for the organization. So that was my usual Sunday. And then throughout that semester, I had classes every day of the week, excluding Fridays. That was one of the great semesters where I didn't have class on Friday. So a typical Monday, this was my genetics class that I took alongside roughly 100 other students. So that was one of my smaller major science classes. And then I mentioned earlier that I minored in American Sign Language. So this was an advanced American Sign Language writing course. So that one was a smaller class. My sign language classes consisted of anywhere between 7 to 15 people. This one was closer to the 10 student size. So I had that one twice a week. And then I communicated with my employers at the Center for Health and Technology to figure out my times that I would be there every week. At this point, I was being paid. So these times in red were blocked off regardless. I needed to study the work that I was doing there. And so I could get paid and end up paying my bills. So that was a guaranteed at least 3 times a week. And then the sports garden at the bottom is my soccer games. So I definitely needed to let loose and relax at times. And so I played soccer on Monday nights, and that coincided with e-board every now and again. In addition to working at the Center for Health and Technology, like I mentioned earlier, I was a tour guide on my campus. And so I did that once a week for about an hour and a half on Tuesdays. This was also the semester that I was taking physics, the first semester of physics, and I loved that first semester. It was all mechanics, so it was easy to apply to my life, and I really had a great time with it. Second semester of physics is where it got a little more difficult. This is one of the psychology courses I was taking for my cluster. This one was psychology of gender, which was an incredible course, would recommend. I think it should be a requirement just to graduate. I learned so much in it just about life and how to navigate and hold myself as both a young woman and as a physician. And then I had my physics workshop for a long time and my physics lab at another time during that week. Things in yellow here I made were important. Top secret dinner. We were doing a surprise party for one of my friends. That was shortly after I got off of a plane. And then I had a review session for a genetics exam coming up. So this is a typical week. On this Saturday here, I would have loved to use it for studying, but I signed up to go do a build for Habitat for Humanity, where we build homes around the Rochester area. So I did that. And then I had a co-sponsorship supporting another organization on behalf of APO, and then we're separated into families in APO. So I had a bonding event that night. It's a pretty hectic week, but I had to be strategic in terms of when to fit in my studying. Missing class was not always an option for me, simply because that missing hour of time I would have had to make up elsewhere, and I really had to take advantage of all of my free time. So between genetics and sign language, I was finishing an assignment or studying for something. If things were slow at work, I could still go to work and maybe do some of my assignments. Thursday mornings were huge. I used that whole morning to study, things like that. And that's just an example of one week in my schedule. Oh. And here's another week, which doesn't have as many things overlapping. You can see some of the consistency. My coursework stayed largely the same. Classes highlighted in yellow meant I had 2 exams back to back that day. But this is a week where my more clinical and med school application related activities were taking an upswing. So for example, on Tuesday morning, rather than using that time to study, I went to a clinic that treated children with epilepsy, and VNS stands for vagal nerve stimulator. And I was doing a particular research project around that. So they invited me to the clinic so I could meet the patients whose charts I would be reviewing later. And I spent a good chunk of time there that morning. RSD stands for the Rochester School for the Deaf. I was a student intern there. I just sat in a classroom and helped 2nd graders and 5th graders work through their assignments, whether it was one-on-one or I was running an activity while the teacher finished up some other things. This was purely fun for me. I mean, it helped on my med school application to show that I was pursuing sign language beyond the classroom, but Thursday mornings were some of my favorites because of this volunteer activity. Senior citizen meeting is another volunteer activity that I was doing once a week for an hour. I would visit a specific resident at the senior center walking distance from my college. And throughout that semester, we worked on a writing piece together. That was a really impactful program that I also wrote about in my med school application. I tried to fit in the gym. My mom tried to get me a personal trainer, and she was so gracious enough to pay for it. And I went a couple of times, which was nice. And then this was another event for the Center for Health and Technology that I went to and was fortunately paid for. My university had just inaugurated a new president and asked our department to come and present. And so I was able to go and do that. Not a lot of other students were asked to do so, which was a really awesome experience. So I've spent a lot of time on these slides, but I just wanted to get across the idea that you can do a variety of different things. You can major in a variety of different things and still achieve the same goals that you need and want to achieve in order to pursue medicine. So I was doing a variety of different things, and any other pre-med student or pre-health student would have an entirely different calendar. And you saw variability just week to week in mine. So imagine the amount of variability from student to student. I personally leaned heavy towards investing my time in getting to know my employers and my research work coworkers, where a lot of other students would have preferred to skip a research position and be a TA and build relationships with their professors a bit more. And those are going to create different sorts of applications down the line, and they're going to create different sorts of experiences in college. I was walking a lot every day on campus because I was walking to my clinical research job, where other students could walk from classroom to classroom. And so it creates a different type of college experience depending on what you're interested in. I prefer to work. I like to be paid. So this is the route that I went in, but it's different for everyone. Now we've talked about my schedule, and we're going to dig deep into some of those red blocks that were on my calendar there. So this is a recap of some of the current research that I'm doing, specifically at the Center for Health and Technology. Outside of that, I've done a couple of summer programs, and I've had a couple of more research heavy programs, but none of which I was paid for over a long period of time. My most meaningful and impactful experience with research has most certainly been at the Center for Health and Technology. I started there when I was a freshman, a first-year student. After one semester of just focusing on my books, the second semester of my first year, I decided I want to get involved in research. The University of Rochester is a first-tier research institution, which meant that every single one of my professors was doing research. There's research opportunities bustling everywhere. And so I was ready to jump in. Once I got a handle on my study techniques and my coursework, I ran towards the research. And so fortunately for me, there's a center right in the undergrad campus. It's a fellowships office that directly works with students to connect them with research opportunities, whether that's on campus, off campus, over the summer or abroad, what have you. And so I was in school. I was looking for something on campus or close to it, and something that was taking people with zero experience and taking them right away. I had no experience on my resume besides my chemistry labs that all students were required to do. And so, especially coming from a smaller high school with no experience, I didn't have a huge competitive edge. So I most certainly utilized that resource on my campus. It was amazing. The person that I worked with, her name was Teresa Long. We're still in contact because she sat with me for about 30 minutes one day, and we talked about things that I might be interested in. And from there, she reached out to research centers and departments and labs that were looking for students and used her connections to get my foot in the door. In the long run, that altered the course of my college experience. I chatted with a couple of different people, went to a couple of different interviews, and landed at the Center for Health and Technology. At the time, they had no other student interns there. They hadn't had another student intern in the past like 10 years or so, 8 to 10 years. And so they really didn't know what to do with me at first, but that worked to my advantage in some ways. It meant that I was able to create my own experiences and really determine what the role of a student intern at Chet really is. And absolutely, they exceeded all of my expectations for my first research position. My freshman year, I worked there for a semester and I was strictly a volunteer. I was not paid. And then one day, the head of the department called me into his office and asked, closed the door and sat me down, and he said, "Olivia, are you doing good work here?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I am. I'm really enjoying it." He goes, "Well, are you important here? Like, do people value the work that you're doing? Are you enjoying it?" And I said, "Absolutely. I think I'm doing really well. My colleagues and people who are supervising over me seem to say so." And he goes, "Well, are we paying you?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm just a student volunteer." And he says, "Well, that's silly. If you just answered the questions the way that you did, we should be paying you." And that was how I ended up getting my first paycheck at this job. I didn't have to ask for it. He sort of just approached me, made sure I was doing the right things, and then got the ball rolling for me. And that's been largely the trend at the Center for Health and Technology. They really reward great work by great people. I have yet to have asked for a raise, but I've managed to secure a couple of them over time, simply because I continue to put in the work and the effort with both my colleagues and the patients that I work with, and that work does not go unnoticed. It's a pretty small group of us, and so they tend to reward really hard workers. I wouldn't change it for the world. I've had an amazing experience. So we can now go into some of the specific projects that I've worked on. We'll spend a little bit of time on this slide because it's probably my biggest word heavy one, but on the left there on the bottom is a brief description of what Chet really does. I work in a specifically narrow realm of what Chet does, but there are a variety of other projects going on at all times. And so Chet really has 5 units, and each of them does a different sort of study. Each of the units can specialize in clinical trials coordination, clinical material services, data modeling, predictive analytics, tech research and innovation, which is the one that I largely work in, and patient-reported outcome measures, which I've done a little bit of work in as well. So on the right there are the specific projects that I've had an immense role in or am the leader of. In my introduction there, they mentioned that I'm a program manager. So that's a twofold role for me at Chet. The first program management position that I had was for the Parkinson's Disease Care New York program. And although it's under the umbrella of a clinical research center, this is more of a care program, which I didn't know I was signing up for when I started. So this is the only program of its kind to offer statewide telemedicine care to people with Parkinson's disease in their homes. When I started at Chet, before I was paid, it was my job to enroll people in this study. So they indicated interest. I gave them a call, said, "Hey, this is what it's about. Do you want to join? And we can set you up for yourself or your loved one to meet regularly with a movement disorder specialist or a Parkinson's disease specialist." And it's just like your televisits that you're doing now in the midst of COVID, except we were doing them a little bit before it was mainstream and before it was cool. So I've been working in telemedicine for the past 4 years, and I went from just recruiting patients to be in the care program to recruiting them and then scheduling them, and then those two things and doing their cognitive assessments virtually. And at this point, 4 years down the road, I have taken full management of the program. I do, of course, have people to help me. I have backstops who are there to catch anything if I miss it, but I'm doing everything from scheduling patients to checking up with them regularly, refilling their prescriptions, working with their primary care physicians to get notes back and forth. They reach out to me if they have any concerns. So rather than going straight to the doctor, oftentimes I'm getting calls saying my knee really hurts and I don't know why. Is it because of my medication? And then I have to work with them and with our physicians to get them the answers that they need, which I knew I wanted to become a physician before this job, but this job really enhanced that experience for me because over the past 4 years, there are over 400 people in this program, the majority of whom I was able to personally enroll. And so I have a lot of personal relationships with these families. It made me realize that direct patient care is exactly where I want to be. And I can't wait for the satisfying feeling when someone can ask me, hey, my knee really hurts. Is it because of my medication? And I can actually answer it rather than going to the physician that I work with or the nurse that I work with to get the answer. I really want to be at that first step for patients and be able to answer the questions that they need when they need them. So that's one program that I've been working on all 4 years that I've been there. In the last year and a half, I recently started working on a deaf health research project, and this one has been absolutely amazing, so much fun. It's called RxASL, and it's designed to better understand the experiences of deaf individuals in the pharmacy and hopefully design some tools like a mobile health app to increase the accessibility at the pharmacy. So far, I've been working directly with a deaf researcher herself. She's a pharmacist, alongside someone who specializes in user experience and design. And we've all been working together to create this survey, interview a variety of deaf individuals throughout the Rochester community, and then code all of that qualitative data to decide what we need to implement into this app. Where are the actual barriers to access at the pharmacy, and what can we do to break those down a little bit more? This is the first of the list so far that's an actual clinical research project. All of the projects I work on are qualitative in nature. I don't really deal with a lot of hard numbers or coding. The lab is not for me. I did it in a summer program and realized I love to work with people. And so the projects that I've been working on here at Chet have been absolutely amazing and have satisfied that craving for me. In that RxASL project, I have the fortune of being able to use sign language every week in our meetings. So I meet with them every Thursday from 3 to 4. And although there is an interpreter there for the other non-deaf individual in our group, because I know some sign language, my mentor and the lead researcher who is deaf, she encourages me to use sign language every time. So I'm using it every week and I'm not forgetting it. And hopefully I'll be able to keep that up throughout medical school so that I'll be fluent by the time it's time to start serving the deaf community as a physician. The next study you see on here is another qualitative research study. This one was actually created entirely by myself and 2 other coworkers at the Center for Health and Technology. So another beauty of this place is that they really encourage creativity and innovation. Our group is called the Innovation Group. And so we constantly try to live up to that standard. And this study is designed to better understand the perceptions of research in the Rochester area in order to increase the participation of minority populations. Because as much as we're achieving our study recruitment goals, our populations are extremely homogenized and they don't have large numbers of people who come from minority groups, such as my own or others like it. And so it's just as important for people from underrepresented backgrounds to be involved in this research so that we know that this research is generalizable and applicable to those populations as well. And so rather than hoping for the best and hoping our recruitment techniques one day start to work, we decided to take 2 steps back and further explore that. So we did a lot of literature reviewing, we designed a survey, we have since implemented it, we are doing follow-up interviews, and hopefully we'll be able to devise some best practices for research centers like ours and others like it around the world to use to better understand the minority populations in their area and approach them appropriately so that they do end up enrolling in their research studies. The next one, and the one that I'm most particularly proud of, is the Research for Exploratory and Applied Learning Program. It's a mouthful. The acronym is REAL, the REAL program, and it was designed entirely by myself and the other student intern who was brought on about a year after me. She and I were the only student interns there at the time, and we were loving what we were doing. We were doing great projects. We were getting direct patient exposure. We were on the cutting edge of clinical care and research at the same time. And we were confused as to how not other students weren't finding this place to work at. It's not that Chet wasn't accepting of them. It's just they weren't finding it. And so we decided that's not okay. There are definitely students out there who need access to this research experience. And so we spent a full day brainstorming and created this internship program. We went on to pitch it to the head of our department, and he was immediately on board. He loved it. And then we went on to get approval from our university to get it approved as an independent study course. So students who took it would get credit, and it was entirely taught by myself and the other intern at Chet. This started about a year ago. So we've since had 3 cohorts of students take this program. And as a part of it, they come in, they have weekly class, they have assignments and papers they write, but they also get assigned a research mentor and are allowed to directly participate in clinical research projects the same way that I was able to my freshman year. Since then, the first 2 students we had in the program have since taken over it. So it's definitely growing and evolving. And this was also an opportunity for myself and the other intern running it to get a publication. We're getting guidance right now and navigating how to publish our first medical education specific article, and we're really excited about it. And those projects are just ones that I've been working on most specifically in the past year and a half. There are plenty of others that I've dabbled with or worked on since my freshman year, doing anything from writing manuscripts. I'll be getting my first publication pretty soon on a different study. Recruitment, I was called upon to recruit for a variety of different studies. And although it seemed like the grunt work of the research at the time, I am now considered like a go-to gal when it comes to recruiting. We're creating a series of best practices for other research studies to use that are within our department. And they go to myself and one other person there when it comes to recruiting, just because we've done so much of it and we know how it's done. And it's nice to sort of be a household name in your department. I've also participated in a little bit of marketing. The head of my department recently wrote a book. So when it comes to an important project at Chet, we are all hands on deck and we all jump in and participate together, which is one of the things that I love there. It's definitely like a family there. My experience has been fantastic. If only I could stick around, I definitely would. If I was staying in Rochester, I definitely would stay longer. And even though I'll be leaving the area, we've been working virtually for quite some time. It's not new to us. And so I'll still be able to work on actually 3 out of 4 of the studies that I just mentioned as a medical student and still get paid for it, which is really awesome. So I've talked to you for quite some time about myself, about my college experience, what my schedule looked like, a lot of the research that I've done. And now I want to finish off our chat here by talking specifically about how all of those things I just mentioned and the things that I've been involved in have prepared me to apply to medical school. And in summary, really, all of the things that I just mentioned have helped me become a well-rounded applicant, which is at the end of the day, all that a medical school is looking for. If I had eliminated all of those extracurricular activities and research and clubs and just focused on my grades, sure, I would probably have a 4.0, which I don't have right now. And I could say that I did ace every single one of my courses, but what is that bringing to medical school and eventually to patients down the road? It's far more important to make sure that you're having quality experiences, exposure to healthcare, exposure to patients if possible. And those are the things that really help you stand out as a medical school applicant, regardless of where you're applying. These 2 pictures here on the screen are 2 examples of the application timeline. It's about a year-long process. It's crazy to think that I'm accepted now, but a year ago today, it's like May, I was probably crying about the MCAT. I took mine in August, as you'll see there, and I rescheduled it several times prior. So I had an extended study period with lots of dips of, oh, I'm not going to take it this semester, I'm going to take a gap year, or absolutely, yes, I need to take it right now. And so looking back, it's definitely nice to see, okay, I made it up the other side. That was really stressful, but it was worth it. But here are 2 examples. So the top one is the general or traditional timeline for applying to medical school. So from January to about May is when students typically take the MCAT. You can take it much earlier if you'd like. That would give you some time to, if you need to, take it again. Studying for the MCAT is a beast in and of itself. It's on average a 3-month study period. And that's usually for people who are studying for it like full time. For me, I could not study for it full time until the summer, which led to postponing it and things like that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So from January to May, most people take their MCAT and get their scores. On average, it takes about a month to get your score back, but due to COVID, scores were coming back about 1 to 2 weeks after you had taken it. So in the past, it takes about a month. And then the AMCAS application for US medical schools opens up in May or June. So for me, I could, in late May, I could edit my application, but not submit it. And then June, I could submit it. So that was that, but it also got postponed for me a little bit. So primary applications are very similar to a college application. It asks for a personal statement, a summary of the 15 of your activities that you've done, including who was a contact there, how many hours, what have you done, and what kind of activity was it. You also submit all of your grades and your letters of recommendation. So that's the primary application. And you can submit it to a number of medical schools, each one at a cost. So for me, I applied to just under 20 schools, but I only planned on applying to 15, but I had a little extra money in the budget. So I threw my best try out at a couple of other ones. And making your school list is a very important process, a very strategic process in and of itself. But nonetheless, you send your primary application, not specific to any school, just your application, out to a certain number of schools. On average, I think like 10 is on average. Once you send all of those out, the schools receive them, your application is processed, and then most schools will send a secondary application to everyone. Some schools are selective, but it's just like your college essays. So you sent your primary application, that school's going to email you back and say, hey, thank you so much for sending that. In addition to that, I want you to answer these 3 to 4 essay prompts, and I'm also going to charge you to be able to send them back to me. So even though you dropped a pretty penny on your primaries, you're going to get more essays, more work to do, and then spend about $100 per school just to send your secondary application back. And those are a bunch of essays, and they usually come all at once. So set aside some time to be able to write them, and those are specific to each school. So make sure you're sending the right essay to the right school and things like that. Once you send in your secondaries, then it's the waiting game. That's when the waiting game begins, because you have to go through a series of interviews. You have to get invited to them, then you have to do them. And then once the interviews are done, you wait again to hear back from a medical school, and they work on rolling admissions. So not everyone is going to find out on the same day. You sort of wait around and stare at your email, or if that school happens to call accepted applicants, then you stare at your phone until you hear from someone. And that thing that you hear could be an acceptance, a decline, they did not accept you, or a wait list. So a wait list isn't bad, actually. I got on a couple of those myself, and they were sad at the time, but in hindsight, those were still better than a rejection. So those are the 3 replies that you could get from a school. And then yesterday, April 30th, by then, every student has to pick one school that they were accepted to and commit to it. You have to pay $300 as your good faith deposit and say, hello, I'm coming to your school. So yesterday was a big day for those of us in the most recent application cycle. I myself opened up my wallet and dropped $300 to commit to the Howard University College of Medicine. So that top one is a general overview. The bottom one there is mine. I was a little stressed about my MCAT, so I pushed it a lot and didn't take it until August 1st, which meant that I didn't see my score until after I had submitted my primary application, which is a bit of a risk for some students, because if my score was really bad, I was stuck with it and I was applying with it. So I took a chance there, but it worked out okay for me. I had an awkward and stressful pause between my secondaries and getting interview invitations. And then I started getting acceptances. I got one end of October, and then the rest of them started rolling in December up through March. And yesterday I committed to a school. I had about 9 interviews, and then I got into all but 2 of them. And the 2 that I didn't get into, I just got waitlisted at. And then I selected one, Howard University College of Medicine. And so that's a general overview of the application process. And this is 1 year. And all the while I was taking courses. This was during a summer. I have been taking courses my senior year. And I did this all my senior year in order to go straight through to medical school. There are students who decide to not take the MCAT their junior year and push it till after they graduate, in which case they take a gap year between graduating college and going to medical school. But it's different for everyone. In any case, you are going to deal with this one stressful year in order to get into medical school. So that's it. We've sort of covered me, my college life, the research that I've done, and an overview of the medical school application timeline, plus my slightly wonky one. And next, you've got some information coming your way. For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, I've linked it there at the bottom, but I compiled some of the resources and information that I've been posting on there into one guide for you guys, in addition to a couple of bonuses that aren't on my Instagram. And I'm sure our moderators here will send them out to you, so you can have those. It's about a 10-page guide with some information for you, regardless of whether you're in high school or college. You can definitely use it if you're thinking of pursuing health research or medicine or what have you. And there's my information there, my email and my Instagram handle. Feel free to email me, DM me on Instagram. I'm always happy to talk to excited students about anything I chatted about today, or really just anything in general. It's the least I can do. There were a lot of people who helped me on my way, so I'd like to continue passing that forward. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. And now we're going to be moving on to asking the questions that the participants have already sent in. So while we're answering these, if anybody has any more questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat.
For sure. So our first question is, what made you interested in neuroscience?
Good question. I knew I wanted to be a doctor at the end of high school, but I didn't know how. I was really taking a risk. I just knew college was like the logical next step, and I assumed that I would figure it out once I got there. And I had no idea what I wanted to major in. I just thought, okay, bio, that makes sense. And neuroscience is technically under the bio umbrella at Rochester, but it's more specific. It wasn't until I took a psychology class my senior year of high school, and psychology has always been interesting to me, but we had one unit about the brain, and he put the picture of the brain up, like a very like cartoony picture, like not super specific like I would see it at college, but it was just like outlining the different areas, like the medulla oblongata, and we were talking about all of these regions and what they do. And that was the most engaged I had ever been with any material throughout all of high school. And so I figured that was really fun. I never got sick of that. I'm actually mad that we moved on to other stuff. So I think I want to do more of that in college. And I actually narrowed my college search to schools that had a neuroscience major. So there were schools that I thought were interesting that I might like, but if they didn't have a neuro major, they were off my list. And fortunately, Rochester was on it. And I ended up pursuing that.
Thank you for your answer. So the next question is actually about the MCAT.
Mhm.
Somebody is wondering, if you take the MCAT more than once, do they take the highest score or the most recent one?
That depends on the school. They will clarify that to you when you're applying. I've heard of schools taking the most recent one. They can definitely see both. Or sometimes schools will do like a composite, and they'll like take the highest, because the MCAT's in 4 sections. So between your 2 attempts, they might just take the highest sections from this one and the highest sections from this one to make one composite score to better reflect your capabilities. But it ultimately depends on the school, and they'll let you know when you're applying.
Okay. Another question we had was, what advice do you have for high school students who want to go into medicine?
Ooh, keep your options open. And that doesn't mean like think about not being a doctor. It just means think about the things that you're actually interested in when you start school, because the days of only bio majors making it to medical school are far gone. You don't have to only study science in order to make it to medical school. You're going to take those pre-med requirements anyways. And so what I wish I had done was, yay, neuroscience is cool. I'm glad I went here and I'm glad I took it. But I wish I would have majored in sign language rather than neuroscience, and maybe minored in bio instead, because that's just where my interests were. And at the end of the day, when you are sitting down and you have 3 exams next week in hard science classes, the last thing you want to do is focus on this other hard science class for this major that you picked that you don't even actually enjoy. Like, sign language was never boring for me, ever. And so I wish I had taken more of those classes in college while I could, because I won't have access to those things anymore afterward. So in high school, do not restrict yourself to just science things. Explore everything, because all of those experiences are going to make you a better doctor in the long
Thank you. So do you have any specific advice that you would want to pass on to students who are going into a science heavy kind of program?
Yeah. Make friends with upperclassmen and find mentors wherever you can find them. Mentorship has been a huge pillar throughout my experience. I didn't spend a lot of time on it today, but I mean, I could talk about it for hours. So, what I did when I was ever stuck anywhere was reach out to oftentimes a stranger who I just knew had been down the same path as me. And 10 times out of 10, they were always responsive, always so helpful. And so, especially in science heavy coursework, it can be overwhelming. You're looking at a lot coming at you, but there are survivors who have made it out on the other side. And half the time, they'll either give you their notes, they will tell you the ins and outs of the professor that you're working with, like this is how he likes to ask questions, or they can just teach you the material or teach you some tricks. That's probably the best thing you can do to help yourself. Stay on top of your work, don't skip class, make sure you're absorbing it in a timely manner, but find some mentors or upperclassmen who have been through it, and they will be your biggest supporters.
I think that's some pretty solid advice. Another question we do have is what kind of extracurricular experiences should I find in order to make my application appealing?
To college or to medical school?
I'm assuming they meant medical school.
Okay, that's fine. First of all, pick extracurricular experiences that you're going to enjoy. They don't have to be related to medicine all the time. First and foremost, if you don't enjoy it, there's no point. So for me, interning at the Rochester School for the Deaf was a big ticket on my application. I talked about it at almost all of my interviews, but it had nothing to do with medicine. I was like teaching them their colors and how to do their times tables, nothing to do with medicine, but it was so much fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would go back if I could, if it wasn't COVID. But in terms of clinical experiences, you do need some of them. Just find what speaks to you. So a lot of people scribe, are a medical scribe. You can be an assistant at a doctor's office. You can simply volunteer with a medically related organization like the Red Cross. You can be an EMT if you're old enough and want to go through the certificate process for that. I know that's a really popular option. A lot of colleges and universities also have student-led EMT organizations, so you can do something like that as well. Outside of that, tutor. Like if that's fun and you like it and it gets you a chunk of change on the side, do that. Pick a class you're really good at and tutor some kids. We have an organization here called Food Link. It's like a big food bank. You can volunteer there if you'd like. Any experience that you thoroughly enjoy and that you gain that you can gain a positive lesson from will support your application, regardless of whether or not it's related to medicine.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
So somebody in the chat was actually wondering, when should you start thinking about what university or college programs that you want to go into?
I'm trying to think back. I think I started thinking about those things at like midway through my junior year of high school. No, I'm joking with you. I think I started thinking about it my beginning of my junior year, which was early in terms of my school because not a lot of the students at my high school wanted to pursue medicine or go into healthcare. So it was less of a stressful decision for them. They were like, I can get the same quality or make the same connections at any school really. And so for me, a neuroscience major is rare. So I had to like get at it a little early. But I'm not entirely particular with how other countries run their application cycles. But if it's anything like the US, I started thinking about it beginning of my junior year. And by thinking about it, I don't mean I was like applying or writing my personal statement. I was just exploring schools and seeing what there was out there. And that really helped me by the time the Common App opened up, because I knew exactly what I liked, what I didn't like, and what were my non-negotiables for a school. For every website, I was looking at the dorms. If they weren't someplace that I actually wanted to go through on the pictures, I couldn't do it. I don't know why. The campus life and dorms were like the main tabs I was looking at for schools. In hindsight, I probably should have looked more at the programs, but about beginning of my junior year, you'll be plenty of advance.
Awesome. Another question we had in the chat was, does what you major in influence what residency you will be matched to later down the line, or are they unrelated?
completely unrelated. Yeah, no, I could have majored in botany, like, and dealt with plants the entire 4 years. They won't even ask about it. No, no. For residency, it really only matters your step 1 and 2 exam scores that you take in medical school, and really how you've done in med school. College is a wash once you're crossed the gates of medical school.
Okay, so this is another question from the chat. So they were wondering, when you were looking at medical school programs, did you consider doing a dual program such as MD or MPH?
I did. For a while there, when I was so intimately involved in research, I thought, I think I have to get my MD PhD. Like, I can't live without the research. I really want to do it. Let me see if I like it. And like I mentioned earlier, like talking to people who are ahead of you, that's exactly what I did. So I looked up PhD programs at Rochester, a couple ones that I might be interested in, and I found their students on there and their emails. So I emailed 10 MD PhD students, and they all set up times with me to get coffee. They were so nice. They met me on my campus, bought me coffee, even though I asked to meet with them. And we just chatted for like 30 minutes each. And I just asked them fired questions like, why did you get your MD PhD? Or like, why'd you get your PhD? Like, do you like it? What is your research like? Would you change it? What would you advise? Like, what's a deal breaker for you? Things like all these questions. So for a solid week and a half, I did this in like a week and a half. So for a solid week and a half, I was like, I want my MD PhD. This is it for me. I have to alter the course of my application. It's going to be totally different now. And after talking to those 10 students, I realized very quickly that an MD PhD was not for me. And it's different for everyone. Some people would have loved those chats, but a couple of solid conversations, some great coffee, and I realized it wasn't for me. My best advice for you, if you're thinking about it, don't jump in blindly, talk to somebody. Students and people who have been through it are your best resource there. If you're thinking about an MD, MPH, or just an MPH in general, literally Google someone, find someone on Facebook. Anyone in this sphere of pre-health or just grad school and advanced degrees in general is always happy to talk to students. It's almost never going to fail.
Awesome. Another question we had in the chat, and this might not apply to the US, but what is the difference between life science, health science, and medical science programs?
Oh, hang on, guys. My mom always calls when I'm in a Zoom meeting. That I don't think it applies to the US. There's no really big difference between health science, life science, and I forget the third one that you said.
Medical science.
Yeah, is that like an undergrad thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we just have majors. And if it's like biology or psychology or whatever.
Okay, so this is the last question in the chat, and somebody was wondering how different is, I think, med school versus dental school?
Okay, yeah. I haven't gone through the dental school process, but a lot of the classes that I've taken in undergrad, I take along dental school students. So a lot of our requirements are the same. I think the major difference is when we're done, I, as a physician, will be dealing with someone's whole body, whereas a dental student will largely be in here in the mouth. So in terms of the actual dental school versus medical school experience, I can't really speak much to that. But I know from the dental school students I follow on Instagram, it's a lot of like, instead of whole body cadavers, it's just like the mouth. But in terms of the undergrad experience, it's very similar, if not identical. Except instead of taking the MCAT, they take, I think it's the DAT they take for dental school. And then similar admissions process. A lot of med schools also have a dental school, so you might be able to explore both on one website.
Okay, so that's all for our questions. So thank you so much, Olivia, for giving us this amazing presentation and answering all the questions that our participants had. Would you like to give any final comments?
Yeah, just be excited and don't hold yourself to any particular standard based on what one random classmate is doing, or if they're doing research and you're not doing research, or if they're volunteering here and you're only volunteering somewhere else. At the end of the day, it does not matter. I did that a lot my freshman year of college, and I learned the hard way that comparison is the thief of joy. So if you pick what you want to do, and you're excited about it, listen to your gut, let your curiosity guide you, because it almost never steers you wrong in this realm of things. And you're going to be a-okay. Get some mentors around you, get a solid set of community, and it's going to be amazing. You're going to get to the place where you want to get, as long as you focus on you, be excited about the things that you're doing, and support others as you can along the way.
Thank you so much. I feel like those are some really inspirational words, and everybody has to like keep in mind that comparison is not a good idea.